Good evening, Orlando. I hope that in this experience, as you hear the music, you will understand it is more than a church event and an opportunity to hear nice music. It is God's appeal to you. Would you agree? More than entertainment. Though the lyrics are great and the music and the performances as well, it comes down to one issue: experiencing God, the name of this production. The United States talks a lot about God and religion. Sewn into our culture, it is part of our fabric nationally, and even more so in light of events since September the 11th, where the discussion of God becomes more weighted in our lives. Indeed, we look for security. But in a culture where God is entrenched, there's a big difference between knowing about God versus knowing Him. And that's the point of our presentation this evening. Not something you know about like a side dish and the big buffet of our busy lives, but a person that you know. You can have somebody tell you about somebody. It's quite another thing to meet the person and experience them firsthand. Then, while there may be much you don't know, this much you begin to experience, and your life begins to change. Let me give you some illustration about this point. I think of a bad girl by the name of Mary Magdalene 2,000 years ago, where in her religious culture, people could not offer her much experience in God. They could offer her law and judgment. But she found hope in the character of God represented in the man Christ we saw His crucifixion portrayed. She threw herself at His feet, and He did not say, "You filthy harlot! Don't you know God doesn't want you living like that?" Instead, He said, "Daughter, though your sins are many, and I know all of them, your faith in me, it has saved you. Your many sins, they are forgiven. Go in peace with God." That word faith there, I love it. It is defined the best, I think, by a concentration camp survivor by the name of Corrie ten Boom, now deceased. She, as a Christian, and her family, living in Holland, helped the Jews escape Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II. And in that effort, they were eventually betrayed and sent to the concentration camps. And in the concentration camps, Corrie's sister Betsy, who would later die there, was challenged by the people around her. How can you believe in the character of a God of love and power, who allows this kind of nightmarish hell on earth? How can you believe? And Betsy said, "I can't explain all of this, but if you knew God, and you would know that He is love, then you would know what's happening around us is not His doing, but the work of evil men." I don't know why God let me come to this place, she said, but maybe it was to remind you that there is no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. She perished there. Her sister Betsy survived, and as I said, she defines faith probably the best I've ever heard, and she said, faith is simply trusting God's character when life has given you a reason not to. How many people have known about God in our church and in our society, and things happen that wear away our trust and confidence in His goodness? We're afraid to draw near and experience what could be known, sometimes keeping Him at a distance. Many of us who go to church and read the Bible, we try those activities, but that's not the same as knowing a person who makes you feel loved and valued. Like the woman caught in the very act of adultery, dragged out to stone her when you sinned 2,000 years ago. You paid cash on delivery. Now we charge it to our account. Let Jesus clean it out. But she had to pay, and the law said she would die by stoning. And when they challenged Jesus, the friend of sinners, what do you say about her? Caught in the very act, she should die. And Jesus said those immortal words, "You without sin, go ahead, stone her. You without sin, cast the first stone." And that would be like the Lord, who would say to all of us who think we're better than someone else, "Let me peel off your carefully polished mask and tell others what I know." For you and I know if God would ever do that, we'd never point a finger at anybody. They got the point. The only difference between her and them, she had been exposed. They had not yet been. So if you want mercy, give it. And they wisely put their rocks down and walked away. And then, she and Jesus standing there, he said to her, "Where are those who would accuse you?" She said, "They've gone." He said, "I don't condemn you either. Now go and leave your life that brought you to this point. I don't want to judge you. I want you to experience mercy," is the message he was conveying. All of us may have things that, if pointed out, would bring us embarrassment or shame. In fact, maybe some of us here tonight are haunted by the past or bound tonight. And there is a God who doesn't want to judge. He wants you to experience mercy, forgiveness, and an opportunity to live a life beyond the way you are. In my own life, I've been a Christian for 22 years. I didn't used to be. Years ago, though I grew up in Christian culture in a town where there was a church on every corner, God was understood and talked about. People didn't say, "Is there a God?" But even in that culture, at that time, because of circumstances in my life, I was not following God. I had not experienced Him, though I thought I knew about Him. I thought He was the one to be blamed for the suffering in my life. Where I came from a broken home with an alcoholic mother who was killed, where I was sexually violated by her lover as a child, where later after her death I was separated from my father and grew up in an environment where I could never measure up. My life finally brought me to a point of confusion and promiscuity, and it was then thinking I knew all about what Christians were like and what all of this faith business was about and what God was to be blamed for. It was then, 22 years ago, He opened my eyes to His reality. And I discovered that there's a lot about God I did not know. Like the Pacific Ocean is vast and varied and filled with depth and detail. I may not know all of that, but I can scoop out my personal experience of it and begin to know its character. And so it was, 22 years ago. He opened my eyes, and He was no longer a code of ethics to debate. He wasn't some philosophy to consider. He wasn't some religious personality or option on the big spiritual buffet. He was a real person with real presence, and I began to experience it, and it changed my life. Well, my life isn't perfect, and there are still areas of weakness and struggle, to be sure, that keep me dependent. But I'm so grateful that there is a God who's given me the thing that I needed to know more than all the other things one could learn. And in the information age where we prize cognitive intelligence and information as a tool, I find as a pastor and counselor, the greatest piece of information you need is a revelation that God knows who you are, and that He loves you, and that He wants you, and He'll take you just like you are. And while there may be much you won't know, you can begin to experience Him and see where that will take you. And so tonight, as we enter into this next portion, we want to sing a song, and I invite you to join us as we do, to experience this God right where you are. Whether you're on the fringe of faith and you do not know Him, whether you have been walking with Him for a long time but you've run into barriers and obstacles that hinder you, whether you struggle or a loved one does, there is a God who has solutions, and most of all, wants you to experience the peace of His presence and the reassurance of His love. He may not solve all your problems in an instant. Christianity isn't a good luck charm, nor is it a magic wand, nor does it prevent difficulty in life. But God, in the middle of it, can put a driven heart at rest, give you peace and confidence that you can face tomorrow, where indeed you may turn the corner. If you've been away from Him, if you're struggling now, this is an opportunity as we sing this next song to experience Him and do business with Him once more.